Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for joining me today. I am Hope from the Fractal Foundation, and I'm so happy and honored to be with the Humanist Society today. I didn't know much about humanism before Paul asked me to be a part of this, but I've been researching it, and I feel like a humanist as well, and I feel like I have a lot to show you guys, so I want to get to it because time really flies, so I'm going to try to be as quick as possible and not waste anyone's time, but also we've got truly an infinite source of material to talk about here today. So with that, I will get started. And yes, Paul, I am indeed a teacher, but I'm a teacher of all ages, not just children. I teach lots of adults as well. I teach adults through an accessible arts program called Arts Connections. I teach visual art, I teach songwriting, I teach acting and character, and I teach art classes as well on occasion through community centers and things like that. And then I also have grown into my role through the Fractal Foundation as the orator at the planetarium shows and doing outreach at events like this. And so I would like to now get us a little bit familiar with infinity. I'm actually curious if anyone here has their own definition of infinity, just because I think that it's fun to have different perspectives. I could talk about it all day, but if anybody feels confident to come up here and tell us what infinity means to them, that would be lovely, but no pressure whatsoever. No one up for it? That's all right. I'll talk about it plenty. So infinity is essentially endlessness. It is a realm where there are no limits. It goes forever. And infinity has been a really inspiring topic for me since I was really little. And so I'm really excited to be discussing it with you all today. So the word infinity and the corresponding symbol were first published in the year 1655 by the English mathematician John Wallis, who was particularly informed by his studies of cryptography and his studies of the circulation of blood, both of which nod to infinity the more that you learn. I spent time as a phlebotomist, which gave me a great appreciation for the heart's ability to facilitate such a powerful feedback loop. Some examples of infinity include the Mobius strip, pi, which I have the first 50 or so digits represented here in different colors of chains. Due to its irrational nature, you could theoretically find any given set of digits within pi, sort of like the infinite monkey theorem, which states that a monkey hitting keys randomly on a typewriter for an infinite amount of time will almost surely type any given text, including the complete works of William Shakespeare, any sacred text you could think of. And of course, we have the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. We also can create the illusion of infinity with sets of parallel mirrors in something called an infinity room or infinity mirrors. And now, what is a fractal? Well, fractals are infinitely complex shapes, which show self-similarity at all scales. Fractals live within the dynamic landscape of infinity. They are eternally complex patterns which repeat forever in a feedback loop. You can make them with triangles, circles, spirals, really any shape you can think of. And you can even eat fractals. This is the Romanesco broccoli, which you can actually grow in your garden and cook in your kitchen. This plant shows self-similarity at all scales, no matter how far you zoom. Now, the term fractal derived from the Latin word fractus, meaning fractured or fragmented. It was coined by Benoit B. Mandelbrot, and if you're wondering what the B stands for, it's Benoit B. Mandelbrot, and so forth. He discovered it in the year 1980 when he was working with the hottest tech at IBM at the time. He was a mathematician who was driven by a curiosity surrounding unpredictable systems, such as the stock market. He pioneered fractal geometry by discovering the most well-known fractal, the Mandelbrot set. Now, this relatively simple equation manages to give us a peek into infinity through a process known as recursion, where basically you take a starting value, plug it into this equation, which then gives us an answer, which you can then plug back into the equation as a new starting value. Rinse and repeat this process for thousands or millions of times, and you end up with the most marvelous pictures of complexity. I'm going to show you a zoom now that takes us into the Mandelbrot set and reveals its self-similar nature. I'm on the verge of something bigger than I know, something born of nothing, infinite and whole at the place for all. Where all things change, right now, no one's gonna ever stay the same. Welcome to the doorway. What is on the other side? It's not for me or you to say, because the blind keep leading the blind up to the end. Now here's where all things change. No one's gonna ever stay the same. As you can see, the shape that we started with was sprinkled throughout the system, and there are actually infinitely many mini Mandelbrot sets hidden within the grand Mandelbrot set that we started with. And so actually one of Mandelbrot's teachers this was Gaston Julia. He had his nose shot off in the very beginning of World War I. But he pushed on and didn't let that discourage him from his hard work. And by the end of World War I, he had his first paper published describing what we now know as the Julia sets. And the really interesting thing about the Julia sets is they come from the exact same equation as the Mandelbrot set, but it was discovered nearly 60 years before the Mandelbrot set. But it explores the exact same equation just through a different sort of mathematical perspective. You have to go to a different plane in order to see these sets, but they are coexisting, and for every point in the Mandelbrot set, there is a corresponding Julia set. The first kind of Julia set we see is known as the Fatou sets. these are infinitely connected sets. So there is no point where these are truly disconnected. The further that you zoom, the more that you will see that it is fully connected and infinitely so. The second kind of Julia sets are the Cantor sets. George Cantor was the first mathematician to postulate that there are infinitely many sizes of infinity through what is known as set theory. For example, there is an infinite set of numbers between 0 and 1, and yet an entirely new infinity between 0 and 2. And that second set may be larger than the first, but it is still infinite. And so this raised our awareness as humans to the idea that there are infinite infinities. And at the time, this was kind of a radical idea. He was considered a fool and thought to be out of his mind. So he was hospitalized for his radical ideas. But nowadays, it's more or less accepted. And so now I will show you what it looks like when we morph between these different kinds of sets. Again, it's the exact same equation. And I think it's pretty interesting that this one equation results in two different types of infinite sets. And then the subset, known as the Julia sets, bifurcates into two different kinds of sets. It's all very autological that fractals themselves are these bifurcating and fragmented things. It's kind of like when a word describes itself, like the word word is indeed a word. Well, fractals are fractalesque. So now we are going to look at the primary patterns that we find in fractals and throughout nature, beginning with the spiral. Then we're going to look at branches and waves. And then finally, if we have time for it, we'll also touch on triangles. Now, spirals. Spirals are really what got me hooked on fractals at a young age. I learned about Leonardo Bonacci on the very first day of being enrolled in the gifted program in school, and it really got me so excited and wanting to learn more, and it had me hooked. And so I actually eventually named my goldfish after the Fibonacci sequence. I called him Fishinacci. And that's because he's a goldfish, and the golden ratio is actually the ratio that is exhibited between two numbers, and the sum of those numbers that adds up into this beautiful sequence. So the Fibonacci sequence is seen in seashells and fractals, and it shows up all over nature, from the the sunflower, which is itself sort of fractalesque as it has little florets inside this giant flower. You can see it in succulents, but also in the human body. We have what's called a cochlea inside of our ears. That helps us to process sound. And even at our fingertips, these spirals exist. And humans have been fascinated with spirals for a very long time. This was a sort of primitive yet precise cosmological tool for tracking solar and lunar cycles, which is known as the sun dagger, found here in New Mexico, located in Chaco Canyon. And this makes sense because if you zoom out far away from the Earth, spirals are shown as a common characteristic throughout the universe, as grand as entire galaxies. Now, the next pattern we are going to look at are branches. Branches are seen also all throughout nature, and perhaps one of the most famous natural fractals is the phenomenal fern, which shows self-similarity even at microscopic scales. And now Leonardo da Vinci had a very early reverence for complexity, often tucking little nods to eternity in his artworks by sprinkling infinity knots through his work like subtle little Easter eggs. These are some of his dreams for different types of flying machines. I, for one, would love to sort of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure Da Vinci and bring him to a balloon fiesta, because I think he might just lose his mind at mass ascension. These are just dreams of flying machines, and it's kind of crazy that that's just how we get from place to place sometimes now, and it's pretty casual. And yeah, so I think that it's phenomenal that he had such foresight. But he also discovered a mathematical consistency in nature, that if you take any cross-section of branches in a tree, you will find the sum of the width of these branches to correspond precisely with the width of the base of the tree's trunk. And this makes me wonder if this would also apply in different parts of branching systems, for example, our lungs. But you also see this branching pattern all the way down to the smaller scale, which is the leaves growing on trees. So essentially, fractal geometry comes from a mathematical necessity to have a language with which to describe nature. And even the mycorrhizal networks working as the underlying brain of these trees exhibit these branching patterns. And the largest known organism on Earth is actually tucked nice and neatly underneath the forest floor in these mycorrhizal networks. And you rarely only see them when they come up in fruiting bodies of mushrooms. And so fractals form over all scales of both space and time. So they can form as slow as the process of erosion, which forms our river networks over thousands or even millions of years, but also as quickly as a bolt of lightning. And in our brains, these electrical networks are also at play. Our brains hold approximately 100 billion neurons, as many stars as are in the Milky Way galaxy. And all these work together through a biological circuitry in order to form our mental maps. And if you were to lay out the surface area of your lungs, actually these nice finite sacs, which are only around 2 liters if you were to hold them, if you were to spread them out, they would take out an entire tennis court, about 80 square meters. And so that's kind of mind-blowing that fractal geometry is what allows our bodies to have so much space, like our DNA, tucked nice and neatly into these finite spaces. And if you were to flip your lungs upside down, you'll see that they sort of look like trees. And I think that's sort of because trees are the lungs of the earth. And so that's something that I think about when I ponder trees. It's hard not to feel like we are connected to them in some sort of way, if not just mathematically. But our circulatory system, which gets its name from having a circular flow where blood is sent from the heart to the arteries, then returned through the veins in a continuous flow. This is also a fractal-esque pattern and a feedback loop. So furthermore, the very foundation of life itself seems to follow this fractal branching pattern seen in the evolutionary family tree, which shows how all life on Earth is connected. So now I would like to share with you a fractal zoom that is full of spiraling and branching patterns. This zoom goes about 1 billion times deeper than the first Mandelbrot zoom I showed, and the deeper you get, the more incredible the patterns you can see. Now, the third primary pattern that we see is waves. And waves are really interesting throughout art history. This is the Great Wave of Kanagawa. It is one of the most replicated artworks throughout art history, which is in itself a kind of fractal-esque system of inspiring self-similar artworks, such as this fractal version of the Great Wave, made by a member on our balloon crew, Benjamin Brown. And waves form all over the place in water and weather systems as an early indicator of complexity theory. And the inventor of weather forecasting, Lewis Fry Richardson, imagined a sort of factory in which mathematicians would compute a weather forecast in different regions of the world in order to form a sort of map of hopeful predictions. He also observed something called the coastline paradox, which is the notion that the perimeter of a coastline depends on the precision of the ruler that you use to measure it. So, for example, you can measure it in big chunks, and that gives you a relatively small perimeter. But the more precise that the ruler gets, the bigger the perimeter becomes somehow. And that's pretty interesting that we can get different measurements for one thing, and that's generally because the waves causing the coastline, constantly eating it away at the coastline, are causing erosion and ebbing and flowing constantly without stopping. So this makes it really hard to measure something. By the time that you got back around to where you started, the coastline may not be where you first found it. And so you can also change the precision of your ruler all the way down to the size of a water droplet, and that would give you essentially an infinite coastline. And we see this wavy behavior not just on Earth, but also in other planets throughout our solar system. And now I'm going to show you a fractal animation that is different than the Mandelbrot set. This one actually uses sine waves. But keep your eye out for the Mandelbrot set we have come to know and love. And there the Mandelbrot set is, tucked inside this entirely different equation. And how to get there? Well, that's through what we call the universality of the Mandelbrot set. It shows up in lots of different types of equations. Alrighty, and the final pattern we are going to talk about today is triangles. And that is because we are super excited to invite you all to be a part of something we call the Trianglathon, the Fractal Trianglathon. We have made giant versions of fractal triangles, which this shape is called the Sierpinski triangle. And with the help of lots of individuals, we put these triangles together in a giant version of the Sierpinski triangle. We've gone all around the world teaching this to students, and kids all across the globe love fractals. We have incrementally gotten larger and larger fractal triangles. This is the largest one so far, made out of 6,561 individual fractal triangles, which themselves are full of even smaller triangles. And surprisingly, this only took around an hour to put together, thanks to the help of a strong community. But we want to make even bigger ones. So you guys can help us do that, because we're hoping to create an even larger one this summer. And to even extend upon that, there's an even more complex version that has infinite intricacy. You can zoom in at any point in this shape here, and it will continue to be complex and rough. And this is called the Koch snowflake. And it is made out of infinitely many fractal triangles. And so with that, I want us to all take a small break. And then when we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about my life and how I got to this point with the Fractal Foundation. And we are also going to sing a little bit of a humanist hymn for you all with the help of my friend Nolan. So stick around, and I'll see you guys shortly.